In this presentation, we will discuss the difference between physical and chemical properties and compare real gold with fool's gold to explore different types of physical and chemical properties. A physical property is a quality or condition of a substance that can be observed or measured without changing the composition of the substance, or what it's made of. In other words, a physical property is a feature, trait, or attribute of a material. It is a characteristic of that material. We're going to look at different types of physical properties. It is important to observe physical properties of something because it helps us to identify what it is we're looking at or working with. Think about the following. What are the properties of a tree? What are the properties of a cat? Can you describe the properties of a stop sign? Is ocean water different from lake water? You can probably identify many properties of each of the substances above, and knowing those properties helps you recognize what you're working with. For instance, if you see a red octagon, you can determine that it is a stop sign and that you will need to come to a complete stop. But if you see a yellow triangle, you would know that you only have to slow down and yield to other traffic. Similarly, you might know that ocean water is saltier than lake water, and that property would make it taste different, allow different types of fish to live in it, and even allow you to float better. Some things have similar properties, but knowing how to find the properties that separate one thing from another is important, especially in chemistry. This is how we can identify one element from another, by looking at its properties. So let's look at a real example of how properties can be used to distinguish between two substances. Years ago, when gold was discovered in California, thousands of people poured into the hills and panned for gold in the rivers and streams. Sometimes they would see shiny gold in their pans and believe they had hit the jackpot. But many times, what they thought was gold was really a gold copycat called iron pyrite, later known as fool's gold. Iron pyrite looks like gold, but it's not. So how could you discover whether you had real gold or iron pyrite? You would need to explore the physical and chemical properties of the golden material you found. So let's explore the differences between the physical and chemical properties of gold and iron pyrite. The first property we are going to look at is luster. Luster is the amount of shine something has. So if it is shiny, we say it has luster or is lustrous. Both fool's gold and real gold are lustrous. This is one of the main reasons why one gets mistaken for the other. So luster is not a good way to tell if you have found fool's gold or real gold. Most metals are lustrous, such as silver, aluminum, and copper. Brass, a metal alloy, which means that it is a mixture of elements, is also lustrous. Another physical property is color. Identifying a substance by its color works sometimes. If you look at the samples of silver and aluminum on the right, you'll notice that their colors are very similar. Although they are not exactly the same, it might be hard to tell them apart. Gold and iron pyrite do not match as closely as silver and aluminum. Gold has a more yellow color than iron pyrite. However, if you did not have any real gold to compare it to, you might mistake iron pyrite for gold. For this reason, we will need to look further at other properties to tell the difference between gold and fool's gold. Shape is also a physical property that can be used to distinguish between substances. Iron pyrite has a more symmetrical shape than gold. It forms a crystal-like structure with corners and edges. Gold, however, is found in nuggets, which are odd-shaped pieces. It can also be found in sheets, flakes, or grains. Hardness is also a physical property. Every material in nature has a different hardness to it. For example, would you rather fall on a wood floor or a granite floor? Granite is a lot harder than wood. Pure gold is soft and bendable. If something is bendable and can be formed into different shapes without breaking, we call it malleable. Because gold is malleable, we are able to form it into jewelry. Think about other metals we use in jewelry. These substances would be malleable as well. Iron pyrite is harder than gold, and it is not malleable. If you hit it with a hammer, it will break into small pieces. If something is breakable, like iron pyrite, it is called brittle. Another property that is related to hardness is ductility. If an object is ductile, it can be drawn out into a wire. Copper is one of the most famous ductile materials because we use it in electrical wiring. Gold and silver are also ductile. Iron pyrite, however, is not. It cannot be drawn into a wire or anything else for that matter. Consider the pictures to the right. Are any of them malleable or ductile? Which is the hardest? Which is the softest? Because we know the physical property of hardness for these materials, we can guess what we can use them for and what they can't be used for. Smell is also a physical property that we often use to distinguish between things. Believe it or not, you can actually tell the difference between fool's gold and real gold by smelling it. Gold will not have a smell, but if you rub iron pyrite on a hard, scratchy surface, it will give off a boiled egg-like odor. This is because both eggs and iron pyrite contain sulfur atoms and produce the foul-smelling gas hydrogen sulfide. Magnetism is a physical property that is found only in metals. However, not all metals are magnetic. If you had a magnet handy while panning for gold, you could easily tell if you had gold or not. Gold is not magnetic, but iron pyrite is. Density is a physical property that represents the amount of mass in a given volume. Pretty much, it indicates how tightly packed a substance is. If you consider a golf ball versus a ping pong ball, the golf ball has more stuff inside, and therefore has a higher density than the ping pong ball, which is full of air. Density is a physical property of a substance and can be used to identify a substance because no matter how much of a substance you have, or whether you divide the material, the density is always the same. It is a ratio of mass to volume. Gold is one of the most dense substances on Earth. The matter in gold is very tightly packed. Its density is around 19 grams per cubic centimeter, whereas fool's gold has a density around 5 grams per cubic centimeter. When panning for gold, prospectors would add more water to the pan, swirling and swirling the pan. The denser substances, including gold, would then sink to the bottom, and they would collect the gold from the bottom of the pan. Iron pyrite, however, would be washed away because of its lower density. There are many more physical properties that we're not going to go into detail about, but you should be aware that they can also be used to identify a substance. These include the boiling and melting points of a substance, electrical conductivity, which is how well a substance allows electricity to flow through it, solubility, which is the ability to dissolve in another substance, and taste. These are all things that can be tested without actually changing the properties of these materials. Now that we've explored some physical properties, let's take a brief look at what chemical properties are and some examples of chemical properties. So, a chemical property describes matter based on its ability to change into a new kind of matter with different properties. Pretty much a chemical property is about how one substance will react with another substance. The only way to tell or determine a chemical property is by changing it into another substance. One example of a chemical property is how a substance reacts coming into contact with an acid. In the case of gold and iron pyrite will foam and dissolve in hydrochloric acid, but gold will not be affected at all. Other chemical properties include whether a substance is flammable or not, whether it has a tendency to rust, how it reacts when placed in water. There are some substances that will produce bubbles or even react violently in water. Toxicity, which is whether a substance is poisonous or not, is also a chemical property, as well as whether a substance is an acid or a base. We will explore what an acid and base are in a future lesson. Hopefully this lesson helped you learn the difference between a chemical and physical property and be able to list examples of both chemical and physical properties. Your task is to complete the Venn diagram to compare the properties of gold and fool's gold and explain how you would determine if you had found the real thing